Well, welcome back to another conversation. This is you know what is sort of official? I'm going to have to talk to Thierry and Adam about this. We actually don't have a name for our podcast, but we're going to call it the ICSDP podcast for the time being. It's the Independent Commission on Sustainable Development Progress. If you want to learn more about that, you can do that at the ICS. That is probably the best way to find out a little bit more about who we are, what we're up to, and what we're doing. And today we're here to have another conversation. You'll find those online. They're on YouTube. They're on the website. Philippe Lassault and Teerooven Soobaroyen is here from the UK. Philippe's joining us from Benin. How cool is that, folks? Thank you both for joining me here today on this podcast.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Yes, it's a wonderful world that we can be connected and sitting in 3 different countries, continents, a whole lot of water and space and geography and history and community in between us and all around us. And isn't that kind of why we're here today, to talk about these things called the Sustainable Development Goals and other related issues and so on and so forth. So it's a real pleasure to have you both. I was going to say thank you for coming on the show, because I do host a show. This doesn't really feel like a show to me today. Today, this is more just about going a little bit deeper on accounting and numbers. And both Philippe and Teerooven have been working on a study for the past couple of years, and they're going to tell us more about it. They're the experts, clearly. But this idea of localizing the SDGs and accounting and reporting around them, I believe, in 4 different countries. But before we step into that and talk a little bit more about this study, Philippe, I wonder, professor at the University of Guelph, a professor of accounting, and Teerooven, professor out of, is it Aston University in the UK, joining us here as well. And you're both professors of accounting. I was joking with both of you, I think, before we had hit record, that I don't think I've ever had a professor of accounting on any of the shows that I've hosted over the last 12 years. So this is like a milestone for me.
And who knows, might be the last 2 we've ever had.
That's right. Yes, first and last. It was such a fascinating conversation. We're never going to have them back. Yes. Yeah. Philippe, I would love to hear more about you and your history. You're from Benin, a professor at the University of Guelph. Tell us a little bit about why you're here. And I don't mean today in this conversation, but how you find yourself in this place.
Thank you, David. I don't often talk about myself, and I can't really kind of talk about how I got here, especially into SDG, and obviously without necessarily say just a little bit about myself. I'm from Benin, born in a village where even having safe water is a challenge. So with that background, so basically I came out of nothing. Basically, I tend to see marginalization from my very, very childhood, and throughout, of this process to get into higher education, I would say graduate studies and PhD. That is part of me. So I care about marginality. And the deep question that drive everything that I do is why? What caused marginalization? How does it endure? And how and why does it endure? And what can be done about it? And SDG is one global initiative to which you could say, inverted comma, aim to address this, right? And so one of the key objectives is, how is this being achieved? Looking at it critically from one of the, I would say, poor continent, Africa. So I'll probably will stop here and let Steven.
Yes, Philippe, so we got a little bit about your background, but I love how, and maybe more of that will come out in the conversation, but I do love how you focused, how you said you came from nothing, and how this has been, I guess, a very lifelong journey, really, in short, without at the risk of sounding trite. But I would imagine the steps from there to here have not been easy. Growing up in a village where you didn't even have access to safe water necessarily. I mean, these are things that most of us in the global north and in the minority world don't have to face day to day. And I think you bring an incredible perspective to this and a very unique voice and lens, really, And I love that you brought up the word marginalization. So I'm hoping we're going to go a little bit deeper on that as well. Teerooven, you're in the UK. You've been there for a while, I'm assuming, but let's hear a little bit more. How do you find yourself as a PhD in accounting? I personally, as I joked earlier, you're the first two accountants I've ever interviewed to my knowledge. I want to hire the professionals when accounting comes into the conversation. I can add and subtract, but boy, numbers just don't really interest in me. So, Teerooven, I'd love to hear how you got pulled into this conversation.
Thank you. So for me, I'm originally from Mauritius. Let's say that from a perspective of economically, Mauritius was always done a bit better than its counterparts. But I think one of the interesting things for me is that there's always been a question about how we see things being implemented. We see accounting reforms, we see countless sort of things being implemented, and they don't succeed, and they don't work, or they don't. And so I think my sort of journey started much more as initially as an accountant. I wanted to be, as you said,
You're a numbers guy.
I always tell this story. I was reaching my school age, and I couldn't pass chemistry, and I said, well, you need to pick a subject, and they said, well, what about accounting? And I met this brilliant teacher who said, I can help you, in a few months, you'll be ready for it. So, and I discovered the beauty of the order that it kind of suggests, that the idea of balancing books, the idea of balancing numbers, the sort of clear, straightforward definitions of assets, liabilities, and how it all lines up and reflects also, I think, the traditional image of the accountant as a sort of person you can trust, person you can integrity. God knows things have disappeared in many ways now, but I think attracted to these ideas. But then, I was very much a functionalist, studying accounting as an object, as a tool. Making sure the tool works best, and then I think it's coming to the UK after some years in Mauritius being an academic and everything else, and meeting colleagues like Philippe, and the whole group around, where we started to have a much more critical conversion to the hidden messages, the hidden agendas of accounting. How accounting is not what you can see is one thing, but what's happening behind, what it excludes. So, for example, Philippe's point about marginalization, inequality, we still don't have a cost for that. We still can't, as an accounting system, we can't. We still, if I buy a product, it doesn't include the cost of an inequality in there, the cost of pollution, the cost of, and yet we are supposed to be a fairly elaborate form of accounting. So that's, I think, is that the sort of, I'm sure we'll elaborate.
No, I'm sure it's going to come out. Teerooven, thank you. And thank you, Philippe, for sharing a little bit about who you are. It always helps, I think, to know a little bit about not only my guests, but I think for our listeners as well, just to get a sense for context. Teerooven, I love how you said that there was something about, the beauty of order. And that's what pulled you in. And then you kind of wrapped up this little moment with this notion of hidden agendas. So have both of you, and this is a question for both of you, Philippe, as well, that numbers are not as pure as maybe we think they are. Is that a fair statement? Is that a question? Like, it's a statement, but it's also a question. Didn't Einstein say something to the effect of the statement of mathematics are certain only when they make no contact with reality? And we can go into the philosophy of that and the phenomenology of that and so on. But is that what you were getting at, Teerooven, a little bit?
Yeah, I think accounting. There's a famous author called Ruth Hines who wrote in the 1990s. Accountants are not conveying reality. Accountants are creating reality. So in the sense that we appear to be recording objective reality, how much money we spend or how much money we get, that sort of thing. So we seem to be purely a neutral process of recording things. But actually, the process is not neutral, because the process does require a priori understanding of what we are recording, how we are recording it, who is recording it, for what purpose. So So in a sense, that's the neutral part. That's the hidden part of what constructs accounting, what is behind accounting. So accounting is defined by, let's say, professional bodies and accounting standards, and themselves they decide what is it to be included and what is to be excluded. So I think that's I think, and then accounting is not purely a financial. We obviously started off, all of us, and Philippe as well, to be a financial accountant. So we search accounting as a technique for recording financial transactions. But of course, elements of what constitute the process of accounting applies to anything else. It doesn't have just to be so the COVID numbers, the SDG statistics, you can think of any sort of collecting of numerical data relies on some of these foundations.
Philippe, I love what you said, Teerooven, and I think I would agree. And my background academically is philosophy, and so the hidden agendas or the assumptions, the foundations. And I love how you talk about I think you talked about the omissions, or even the form of, can we say, numerical censorship. Philippe, I'm interested to hear about that. So this idea of marginalization then doesn't just become an unexpected outcome. There's actually a sense of intention behind it as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, as Stephen was saying, what to measure and how to measure it is defined by a class or group of people. So even when we apply in accounting, we say, okay, we're measuring the one recording may not realize that he's recording things the way some group of people want him to record. So if you just look at the recording process, you say this is an objective, this is factual, this is, but that process is guided by other, interest, and depending on who are part of those groups might benefit and who are not part of those making those decisions, like accounting principle, accounting standard. These are not neutral kind of things. These are coming from, and the same thing apply to everything that we do when it comes to statistics, because these statistics are not just produced as an end in themselves. They inform decisions that impact on other people, and those people not necessarily as part of those kind of decision-making process. And so they don't have a voice in that process. So they can choose things to work in a way they would have expected in the first place. So other people basically, and that's also explain what about marginalization. You excluded in that process, and at the same time you are affected by it.
Right, you're right. Included but affected. Yeah, no, that's really good.
You are excluded, but at the same time you are affected for it. So the numbers that we get in, and of course we can question many aspects of it. The numbers are also not neutral in the sense that where, what we define, coming back to SDG, for example, what constitute or who constitute poor, for example, in Canada, may not be same when we are in Benin or in Mauritius or in Madagascar and so, right? So it's not neutral in that sense. Is contextual, but exactly. But if you look at, SDG, even when we say localization, or you have kind of standard kind of set of processes that is expected to apply, so things can be compared from one setting to another and so on. So I will give you an example.
So numbers are never apolitical.
Of course, no, numbers are not political. Of course not. And let me give you an example.
And yet this, sorry, Philippe, I've got to ask this. Go ahead. We believe, though, on some level that numbers never lie. And how is it that we have this Orwellian sense of doublethink where I don't know what the percentage on the numbers of the weather, the meteorologist being accurate is. But yet, what is one of the first things many of us do if we're going on a fishing trip or a picnic with our families? We check the weather report. We want to know. It makes sense right? And there's reasons for that, and there's footnotes to this. But what is it about numbers? Why do we we just seem to set aside this idea, certainly from a policy perspective, a political perspective. Well, the numbers never lie, right? And Teerooven, even you talked about this idea of trust. Anyway, I'd love for both of you to respond. And Philippe, you had an example for something, maybe it'll help tease this out. But I do want to talk about that a little bit because I think it applies to the global response to what's going on with the SDGs. I really do. Philippe, please.
No, I mean, no. I mean, that is something I was going to talk about. I mean, we don't have, but just, I mean, did a field work in Ghana not long ago, and if you look at the indicators across, I would say all the SDGs, but we were concerned about three men: poverty, health, and education. And if you look at this, you see how many of the indicators were missing. But then what is reported to as at the indicator level. But within that indicator, so many dimensions were missing. So many, not just, some of it. And what people say across the board was, it's not that the data is not necessarily available. Some are not available, that's for sure, but some were available. But because they were not collected the way that those who were looking to get those indicators, the way they wanted them to be, so they were discarded in the first place. So again, it comes down to some of these exclusion. And by whom? Okay, exclusion by whom? Policy decisions are made on these reported indicators that has so many, the local data discarded, and we're making decisions. We're talking about health. We're talking about education. And you can see how many of these people are affected without even knowing in the first place that they've been affected, and decisions being made to affect them in a way that not necessarily align with their day-to-day living reality, in a sense.
I think one of the examples we can see, I think, for example, if I take Mauritius or other countries where there's always been a system to record things, David. There's always been, many of the statistics around health, education. There's a whole ecosystem prior to the SDG, so the UNESCO, the WHO, they already had a lot of indicators around, maternal mortality, around people vaccination. There's a series of, as you described yourself, hundreds of indicators that are here. So they existed in a way. So it's not as if that they didn't exist in a way. They were there. They were more narrowly defined, narrowly used, much more perhaps technocratically. They would inform. So in the case of Mauritius, there is certainly a data at the health level that goes to particular heads of department, and they say, okay, we need to improve vaccination rates, we need to do that. So at that level, it was always there. When this SDG came, in a sense, it sort of crystallized on a set of targets instead of a sort of the United Nations. Oh, we've got to report to the United Nations. We've got to be. And then the interesting governance element in Mauritius that I can talk about is that suddenly this has to be handled by the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Now, you wonder, well, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in most countries is not necessarily known for transparency. If anything, the nature of diplomacy is to tell as least as possible, or to be very careful with your words and your terminology. So culturally, you can imagine if the ministry was, if the statistics were under the hand of particular experts in transparency and indicators and measurements, you would get a different outcome. So, of course, the report that comes out, and that is actually public, is very vague, lacking detail, based on a lot of judgments. And of course, none of the indicators look bad, of course. None of the assessments look, oh, we're doing very well, we're on track, we're not on, we are progressing. So in a sense, it's as you're saying yourself, governing by the numbers. Once you throw at numbers in a conversation, once you throw targets at individuals, almost psychologically, and that's what is the beauty and the beast of accounting. It's kind of the story of the beauty and the beast is accounting has this ability to suddenly draw attention, get you focused, get you interested. But yet, obviously, it brings a number of behaviors, and in the case of SDG, fundamentally, I'm just going to conclude, fundamentally, it's a political exercise. It is not lack in account. Maybe companies and whatever, even there, you might argue there's an incentive to communicate information in the best way possible so that it doesn't, wreck the market, or it doesn't infect the market.
Thank you both. I couldn't help but go to a meeting I had a couple of weeks ago with a nonprofit, an NGO in the US, and how somebody was around the table, stood up at the whiteboard and said, okay, all this conversation is great. I just need the numbers. What are the numbers? As if this is how we're going to make this decision, that it's just some sort of, as you said, governing by the numbers, that even the mere act of this person standing up, taking control of the room with the whiteboard marker in the hand, wiping all the hard work that's already occurred to get to just the numbers, is an ideological act of a particular sort, it seems to me, and it's going to sway the conversation in a way. And so I couldn't help but think about that while you were both chatting. So is what you're proposing here, how's this? It's not so much about being critical as it is about being careful. Is that a distinction that we could talk about?
Well, I think, careful in the sense of, I don't know, do you take the numbers as they are? What do you mean by careful, as in taking decisions, not taking decisions rashly based on the numbers?
Well, I guess I'm already starting to point towards the ICSDP in a sense, this independent commission, the idea that we have this group of people represented from many, many countries, many, many different disciplines, providing that care and concern, if you will, even Philippe, if you know what I mean. Not careful in the sense we're just going to look at the numbers, I don't think. But hang on a minute here. Let's look at the numbers. But what about marginalization here in this country versus in that country, et cetera, et cetera. And so the more voices around the table can clearly create a lot of clutter, I suppose, academically. But at the same time, I think it can bring a needed perspective that the current goals don't seem to have, because the clear assessment right now, if our listeners were to punch in SDGs in the news, you're going to find out that we're not doing very well, that we're behind, that the UN said we need, and I love this number, $4.3 trillion to meet the goals.
There's
wow,
a point
really? 0.3 trillion. We were 100 billion off, So anyway, I just think, this idea of care and concern is rising to the surface here for me. Philippe, you look like you want to say something.
No. I want to say, be careful. I would agree. That's where we go. And we tend to say the numbers speak for themselves, right? But what we're saying here, the number don't speak for themselves. You always going to look into what the number is, why the number is, why is it got in a way it is got, how, and all those are gonna lead you to some answer as to how you're going to look at the number itself. And surprisingly, David, not many of us as human, as people, are not made to take a reflexive kind of stand when it comes to numbers, because we, through schooling and everything, we tend to see the number as objective kind of fact. People come to portray this is the fact. 20 people or $20, if it's the fact. But what we're saying here, that may not be the case. 20 is not necessarily a fact. It's constructed to be 20.
Yeah, well, what I'm hearing is that both of you in this kind of role are playing the role of the philosopher, of the political scientist, in a sense, to say, hang on a minute here, or the ethicist even. There are other factors here at play. This isn't just a business decision that we're making here. I've always loved that line too. It's just business. Well, actually, no, it really isn't just business. What's the context around that? What are the assumptions and so on? Teerooven, would you say that your study, which by the way is going to be, for those listening, available, I don't know when, but maybe you can give us some insight on this, but the study will be available ultimately in accounting, business, political science journals, maybe some development journals as well. So keep your eye out for it. Can you talk a little bit about just how far you're seeing that maybe we're off track on the SDGs, and why the need for a commission like the ICSDP?
I think, just to clarify, it's 4 countries: Tanzania, Ghana, Mauritius, and Benin. And I think what we were interested in is to look at the trail, where do the numbers come from? So it was a very simple question. You're telling me X, but where is it coming from? And then, so it was a lot of conversations. I know Philippe has done a lot as well. For me, it was a lot of conversations between the technicians, the people who are working on the nitty-gritty, trying to get the numbers as right as possible. And some of them telling me, we have a problem with this particular metric. Next year we'll work on it. We can't do anything now. That sort of thing. So they were dealing with this in a rather, and then they said very clearly, then there's the politicians. Then we send the numbers up and we don't want to know any more about it. They knew exactly how this then would be, how we will be used. It's not our concern. So this is two groups of people. So I think we want to highlight perhaps, and it will eventually be published in papers, is the sort of challenges. Firstly, because we've both done a lot of research on attempts to instigate reforms, attempt to instigate international reforms, global reforms. Okay, this one is not coming from, let's say, US or whatever, but it's coming from United Nations. But nonetheless, I think the logic of transposing, here's a bunch of metrics and you need to meet them, similar to a company, it's kind of very problematic. It's very, very problematic. Philippe has mentioned all the variations, the different African countries, the systems are not necessarily geared to this. One of the things I always feel also is, are we overkilling it? We know the problems that certain countries are facing. We don't need, a lot of money spent at trying to collect data just to make someone satisfied somewhere, but rather get to the tackle of the problem. So I think there's a lesson around development of these metrics, the development of these reforms, how it impacts on countries differently. Attempts, futile attempts to just put the countries on a table and to say Ghana, Mauritius, and then just look at a number and say, oh yeah, one is higher than the other. It's what I call a sort of deficit of commensurability. You try to compare orange apples, pairs really, but you're kind of creating an impression that somehow this number is comparable from one country to another. So it needs a lot of background information for it to make sense to go forward. I think that's
that's great. So many places we could go with this conversation, and it really is fascinating for so many reasons. Philippe, is there a sense coming out of your study in these 4 countries, and I'm sure you and Teerooven have had these conversations, or at least I would think you have, that we would have been better off without the SDGs? That maybe, did we need 17? Did we need 254 indicators? And has it really just muddied the waters? I know I've put about 3 or 4 questions in there, but the theme of it is, might we be better off? We don't need a solution today, obviously. It's going to take time. And there are people working on it. And I've worked in development for 25 years. There are good people trying to eradicate extreme poverty. And we're a long way away from it, but there are people that have their sleeves rolled up literally and metaphorically, and that's a beautiful thing. I wonder, how are you feeling about that from a real practical kind of on the ground perspective?
Thank you, David.
Go ahead.
Once again, we're not saying that the SDGs are not comprehensive enough. When you look at the 17, you look at the sub-component and you say, okay, this is beautiful. The way I see it on the ground is these tend to be seen as an aspiration. But I wouldn't say idealism, but in a sense also could go, but is that realistic in terms of what is achievable? What is achievable in each context? That's another question. And this is where we're having concerns. The rush to place donors, because again, money behind it, the rush to place donors and also to showcase what country, what politician doesn't want to be seen as doing great. So look at all these kind of education policies that we have introduced, both in Benin and in Ghana. And I see, including the feeding program in this, I went to some, and you see the type of ingredient they use in the type of and just to say, because of the SDG, we have fed a number of people, we have a number of kids, but go on the ground and see how these kids are fed and what they are fed with and so on. And this is where we challenge, this is where we haven't, we're not taking into account the grand issues in the local context. And that speaks to our notion of localization. That aspect is just an instrumental kind of way to show that we care for the country, given the differences, cultural, social, and so on. But in fact, that's not really kind of what we are seeing. And in many ways, those local people, especially politicians and so on, they also understand and see how they can play the system and to get the money side of it, and also to showcase, the impression to so the impression that they're doing well and progressing and going to the direction that is expected from them. So I would say, come back to a question: the 17, are they enough or too many? My answer would be, we need to look at each contest. And going back to what I said about 20 is not comparable. But this is what we try to do. Look at the poverty, 1.25 below $1.4 a day, you've been poor. $1.25 in Canada and Benin is not the same. Okay? In Mauritius is not the same. In Ghana is not the same. So even within African countries, how comparability works is that in that sense. Okay? I mean, I would say it doesn't to a large extent.
I think if I wanted to be a little bit more critical, I would say the jury is still out. I think there's certainly, I mean, you can take two sides to the SDGs. I mean, it's very aspirational, ambitious. It kind of sets out what we think, we need to do about society, where we need to be, improving various indicators. And we know the problems are there, the problems of health and all of this. So I think to some extent, it kind of has a mobilizing nature. But equally, I think it has a totalizing nature. So I think it's kind of becomes totalizing. So if it becomes a sort of, there's a couple of sort of, not to bore you with sort of theoretical elements, but there's something called means-ends decoupling. There's a sort of a situation where, because you spend too much time focusing on meeting the numbers, you slowly slip away from actually what is it that you want to achieve. So you start, okay, I want to improve.
It's almost, Teerooven, sorry to interrupt. It's almost like mission creep in a way.
It's a mission shift.
You have a goal in mind, and you get so sidetracked.
Yeah. Because obviously the goal is subjectively driven. The goal is massive. So you start putting numbers, and then you start finally forgetting about the goal and you're trying to beat the numbers. And so that there's a paper we wrote about this where it's an NGO situation where the CEO was thinking of doing a good thing, was well-intentioned in saying, look, we need to report on the number of beneficiaries that we are helping, which on its own is not necessarily a bad thing. The problem is that the various branches of that NGO in different countries misinterpreted the numbers, this new idea, as a performance measure, and started to get involved into, let's say, less useful projects simply because they got numbers. And they suddenly forgot what were their mission. So I think the danger of a totalizing nature, that's what I mean by the totalizing nature of it, is that it becomes this. I think the final angle, slightly more critical again, I think my experience, and Philippe knows a bit about this, is development industry, for the want of a better word. The development industry itself seems to be quite benefiting from this, this whole funding arrangements, consultants, Maybe this is part of keeping this industry going. But whether they have achieved, and I've asked myself very hard questions in that project Philippe and I are involved, seeing that we're trying to do this particular agency is trying to do this thing for nearly 15 years and not able to achieve it. And what I can see is just a lot of people doing, being obviously paid, lots of money being invested into this particular agenda, where we can see very clearly, Philippe and I, there's no way this is going to happen. So in a sense, it does speak a little bit to where these resources are going and who's benefiting, and as a result, why SDGs might suddenly be very, very. We want to make it happen. If you see.
Well, what's so interesting about your approach to this, too, both of you, this critical approach. And I want to reflect more on this idea of care and concern. I mean, I think a lot of development workers who get into the field get into it for those reasons. But I'm wondering if over time, and I think I've seen this, they get off course. The goal of the goals, they lose sight of that because they're trying to raise money, because they're trying to please donors, as you said, Philippe, and so on. And And please, Paul, who name a politician that doesn't want to give good results? So they get off track and they lose sight of the reason. Tom Petty, the folk rock musician, has a great song called "All the Wrong Reasons." And I think we end up, and I wonder to what degree that has had an impact on the MDGs before them. And I think it's so interesting, Teerooven, that you talk about the other goals. There always have been goals and objectives. And maybe the bigger question is, and we don't have time for it today, maybe we can have you both back and chat at greater length, but it's about maybe a fewer, more
Yes.
care and concern around context. I mean, one of the things I've learned in 25 years of working alongside NGOs and in many countries is we usually don't, especially white Western males, I'm going to say it out loud, we don't listen too well. But I think most human beings don't listen very well, actually. And I wonder if really at the core of this is this idea of, put the clipboard away, put the theory to the side for now, and how about we just sit down and listen? And let's talk about that. Let's learn about the context we're in. And I think it's fascinating, the lessons that you've been learning from the study and what we're going to be able to learn from that as well. I wondered if as we wrap here, this part of our conversation, if you could talk a little bit about this idea of accountability. You talked about it earlier, Teerooven, trust, which I think is fascinating. I would love to go so much deeper on that. But transparency, accountability, results in the agenda, in the global development agenda and the ICSDPs. Do you see having a commission like this as being almost essential, not just valuable, but essential?
Oh, of course, and that is the reason why I joined this, and that's the reason why we're having this conversation. And I spoke to Tegan, and we both realized that is very important. And the commission, what they're doing, and I thank Adam for this, is critical because is providing a critical voice and trying to take a reflective approach to the whole SDG project. Okay, we all know that in 2030 this is not going to be realized. We are going to be far away. But then this is not just 2030. Things are happening, probably worse happening than 10 years ago. And if you look at what is happening around us today, you look at the US, look at France, look at, the Middle East, and look at Sudan and so on. I mean, the challenges are there, and we need an organization like the ICSDP. And as I said, that's the main reason why I joined, and even share the same.
I'd love, no,
So
that's great.
self-development is not just for 2030.
Right. It's as if we're going to reach it, right? This is so beyond 2030.
I think that it's important to have these reflections and these discussions and continue to talk about it. My thought about this is, how do we bring it back to context, to different countries? So we take the lessons from this. So here's for the want of a better word, here's a sort of a way of thinking we've tried to propagate. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but it brings some thoughts, some way of mobilizing, some way of thinking. But should every country really just kind of look at this and say, look, can I develop my sort of localized way of handling this? Because in the end, fundamentally, this is down to the state, this is down to the stakeholders in the country, the people in that country, to say, we need to take charge, we need to meet SDG 4 or whatever it will be. And therefore, how do we prepare countries to operate much more contextually and specifically to their challenges? The challenges are global, there's no doubt. But the actual doing, the actual getting to grasp with it is local. There's no way out.
Yeah,
of
no,
this.
I love that. And that's the localization. I mean, for me, this is the big takeaway, this idea of localization and empowering communities, which I've really tried to over the last few years in my work. I do many other things, but as a podcaster, whenever I have a conversation, I try to see the community in there, whether it's a filmmaker or whether it's a philosopher, a comedian, or an author, this sense of community, your neighbor, those in and around where you live, that's really what this is all about.
And one of the just a quick point.
Yeah,
one
please.
of the findings I thought, I don't know, Philippe may contradict me on this, but some of the conversations I've had with the non-stake actors, community organizations in Mauritius, for example, none of them are involved.
Isn't that
Kind of
wild?
slowly over time, some of them obviously using SDGs as a way to obviously to support whatever funding, whatever. But most of the society, most of the community, there's no involvement. They're not in any sort of official structures by which they would say, okay, we are government and us together in tackling this. It has become effectively a state-led, a state-driven, with not much that sort of people on the ground. So that is the sad part of it, I think, in many ways.
So
Definitely.
the very people that needed to be at the at the table were not.
So again, the process basically, once again, the scope of marginalization issue we've been talking about. Those we say we making policy for are not involved, but at the same time, we're going to be affected by the policies we're making. And in many cases, we don't even understand the reality, what they're living. Because none of these people, politicians, or even civil society actors involved, don't live these people's day-to-day life. So how, without involving them, we are better placed to make decisions that affect them. So maybe because we don't see them worth enough to understand what they're living themselves. That could be the assumption, and that there are also other kind of interest around even the politics of SDG.
No, it's,
many actors are involved.
So many good things here in today's conversation. And I think I can always say that I feel like my conversations around these issues are unfinished, that you're barely starting. We're almost at 45 minutes and we've barely scratched the surface. But what have we talked about? We've talked about hidden agendas and about the politicization of these types of issues and the language and the numbers itself. And I think we need to be reminded of that often. We really do. What's that old comedy line, just the facts, from, I forget what that, Dragnet, I think, there's an old 60s and 70s reference. Thanks for dating yourself, David. But anyway, this idea that they are just the facts, we need to keep that front and center. And then, Teerooven, your comment about, I love your question, how do we prepare? Well, maybe one of the ways is that we need to start listening. And how do we do that? If there are going to be another set of goals, and as Adam Snade has laid out in Hidden Politics, I mean, really interesting critique, not just interesting, an incisive critique about the lack of precision around these goals and the indicators and so on, and what are the implications. And the reality is, what continues to blow me away, Teerooven and Philippe, is that people are at the core of this.
Yeah.
This isn't just a policy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just a policy. There are important, profound implications to all of this. And I want to thank you both for doing this study, for the work in 4 different countries, for joining me here today. Any kind of final thoughts that you want to toss out in this conversation, or do you want to save that for part 2?
I think we'll keep it.
We'll keep it. We'll save it. Yeah, we'll have you back. And for those listening who can, please check out the site, the ICSDP.org. Please subscribe to the podcast. Please sign up for the newsletter. You can do that on the site, and you'll be able to find out a little bit more about Teerooven and Philippe as well there. Thank you both for joining me today on this difficult subject, but we've been able to go a little bit deeper, and it's been a real pleasure to chat with you both today.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. My pleasure.